Would you state your name, please?
William Leslie Hickerson.
Mr. Hickerson, where are you currently employed, in what capacity?
I work in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm employed by the University of Tennessee Health Science Center and University Clinical, along with Regional One Hospital, as the director of the Burn Center, Firefighters Burn Center in Regional One Hospital.
Dr. Hickerson, you just stated you are the director of the burn unit at what we call the Med.
Yes, sir.
And on December the 6th of 2014, were you in that same capacity?
Yes, sir.
Now, were you actually at the hospital on December 6, 2014 that evening?
No, sir, I was not.
Who was the attending physician or that particular night?
Dr. Michael Van Vliet was my partner and was on that night, sir.
Were you contacted by Dr. Michael Van Vliet regarding a young female that had arrived named Jessica Chambers?
Yes, sir.
And did Michael Van Vliet describe to you the condition that she was in?
Yes, sir.
And did he also send you photographs of her condition?
Yes, sir.
And did you and Dr. Van Vliet have a discussion regarding her potential condition and her prognosis of survival?
Yes, sir, we did.
And can you describe for the jury what that discussion entailed?
We felt at that time the burns that she had sustained were such that she was not able to survive that injury.
And what type of burns were they?
She had third-degree burns, sir.
Over what percentage of her body would you say?
Well over 90%.
Given that percentage, were you and Dr. Van Vliet the ones who gave the order, as Ms. Overton just testified, to provide comfort care?
Yes, sir.
And are you aware that Jessica Chambers passed away that night at the Med?
Yes, sir.
When you say third-degree burns, as a burn expert, would you describe the severity of different types of burns that the body?
Yes, sir. When you look at the skin, you have two different layers. You have the epidermis and the dermis. Some burns involve only the epidermis. The second-degree burns are divided actually into two parts: a superficial second degree, which goes into the upper portion of that second layer, and a deep second degree, which goes into the bottom layer. And then you have third degree that goes all the way through, and then some people even include a fourth degree that would be into muscle or bone.
And when you mention third-degree burns, are third-degree burns what I call reversible?
No, sir.
Will they heal on their own?
Only the very small, that would be about the size of, small areas that would contract in and heal by scar. But anything that's the size of what is in this situation is not going to heal, sir.
And can you describe the process that the skin goes through when it sustains a third-degree burn?
Well, the process would be that obviously the higher the temperature and the longer the contact, the deeper your burn will be. So basically, if you're out in the sun, you're going to have a sunburn. But if you're in a very hot environment, it's going to go through that upper layer of the skin into the second layer and on down. So it basically cooks that skin, whether it is a flame burn or whether it's just an extremely high temperature that you're going to be involved with.
And is there a particular product or something that you would compare that skin to in regards to touch?
If you're talking about the third-degree burn,
yes,
in this situation, a third-degree burn is very similar to leather. It's thick. It's nothing like what you assume to be your skin, where you can reach over, you can pinch it, you can pull it up, it goes back. My skin doesn't quite go back as old as I am now like it did when I was 21, but it still has elasticity and goes back. Unfortunately, when you sustain your injury that's a burn injury, it denatures that collagen. So what we've come to expect, along with our skin that has collagen and elastin, no longer has that. It's more like a shoe that you've gotten wet and put it over to dry and then try to put it on. It just doesn't stretch. It doesn't do anything like you're used to.
You mentioned the severity of her burns. You've worked in the burn unit for a long time. Is this a normal case that you see in the burn unit?
No, sir, not at all.
Have you been able to view not only pictures that were taken from the crime scene, but also pictures that were taken from the autopsy of Jessica Chambers?
Yes, sir, I have.
And have you been able to describe those conditions for us, the burns in detail for us in looking at those photographs?
Yes, sir.
The next photograph I'm going to show you actually is a photograph from her rear area. And the first thing I want to ask you, we talked about some areas of her body that would be spared. And could you explain to the jury what you mean by spared?
We talk about sparing. This would be an area that's spared, where you see normal skin through here. And this would be where she was laying on something, but that area on the buttocks was spared. The rest of this all is third degree to varying degrees. This just happens to be deeper and more of a tanning process, not suntan, but the leather that we're describing, that the skin is even further destroyed through here. You can see the outer layer of the skin coming off here. You can see sparing that would be to some parts of her scalp, but then you see others that have the burns that's within there as well. There's no sparing through here. All of that's burned.
Dr. Hickerson, these are two photographs from the top and bottom of her front torso and front of her legs. Can you describe these photographs for the jury?
Yes, sir. What you see here is the burns that we were talking about before on the on the legs. This area through here, which would be through the groin, has some areas that are spared. Okay. All of this, third degree burns. All of this, third degree burns. This that looks white, third degree burns. It's where that outer layer of skin has literally been pulled back like a glove. And you can see that where it's still on the fingers and the thumb. These cuts that you see were placed by Dr. Van Vliet in order to try to get her to have more air getting into her lungs. Once that skin is burned like this, then it's like putting a cast on. And you can try to punch air in, but it doesn't go anywhere because that skin is so tight. It's that leather again. So you put incisions down through here like this and cross, so that then you can try to get that air into the lungs so you can get more perfusion of the blood that goes through there picking up the oxygen.
I do want to ask you a question about the run report from MedStat, being the ambulance service. There was a statement that had been made earlier that breath sounds were clear and equal bilateral.
Yes, sir.
Would you explain that actual term in connection to what her body was going through?
Sure. Just because your lungs have not been damaged to the extent that they have asthma, that you're listening to wheezes, that there's not consolidation that would be from pneumonia, which you wouldn't expect at this stage. They should be clear, unless there's such a constriction of the upper airway that you have a stridor at their vocal cords. So she gets air in. It's not a lot, but she gets some air in. So the breath sounds will be equal from the left and the right, and they should be clear. Doesn't mean she's getting a lot of air in, but she's moving some air.
Due to the condition of her body, numerous firefighters have already testified that they almost had to get in her face to hear any sound she was making. Would that make sense?
Yes, sir, it would.
And can you tell the jury why?
Because again, we were talking about, remember that you got to get the air in, you got to get the air out. On some of your other pictures that you have, you see the face is just, it's basically like a mask because it's like this portion of her skin. It doesn't move. And each time we talk, again, my lips change, my cheeks change, so that I make different sounds along with my tongue. But I have to have the air coming out. And that's coming from your diaphragms, coming up through your vocal cords, and then out your lips.
To finish off with a question about the diaphragm, one of the firefighters said that, and a couple of firefighters talked about her position, but as they tried to lay her on her back, she couldn't breathe. They had to put her almost in a side or fetal position in order to get air.
Yes, sir. From a physiology standpoint, that's what I would expect, because this isn't moving much. And if you put someone on their back, then you got their entire weight coming down. So the back now is not going to move with you. On the side, it'll be the easiest position that she could get in to move any type of air.
And you actually mentioned something to me about a bellows. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury what a bellows is for those that don't know.
I bet everybody knows what a bellows is. Where, growing up, get the fireplace started, we had the bellows that you use. Okay? And you bring them apart, get the air in, push them down, get the air coming out. Well, the lungs are very similar. Okay? They expand, they contract. And when we contract and push the air through, we can get air coming out that we make sounds with. So if you can't get that bellow expanded to bring the air out, you're not going to be able to force anything out through there to get any type of volume. Okay? If you're going to yell, do you start with your lungs empty? I mean, every time I yelled at my kids, I took a good deep breath and shouted at them. Can't do that like this because you can't get that air in.
Dr. Hickerson, before I move on into the larynx and the vocal cords, there are some marks on Jessica Chambers' body that I asked you about specifically that are a different color than any of the burns, and they're directly below the breast and some spots along the abdomen or torso. Can you describe those marks?
These marks look more like bruising.
Would those marks be attributed to the fire?
No, sir.
To finish up with her body, one of the firemen actually described her as a zombie. You understand what I'm saying? They
Yes.
described her walking
Never
as
seen
a
one,
zombie.
but I understand.
We've actually heard the defense talk about how the fact she was walking.
Mhm.
Could she walk?
She could walk.
How would she
It's
be
not
walking?
going to be a normal gait. Because when we normally walk, we put our heel down, we spring through, we bend our knees, we move our hips. Likewise with our arms, we bend them. Before these cuts were placed, this is going to be so tight that if you tried to force those into a position that normally would be like this, you may even crack that skin. With the legs, it's going to be more that zombie walk because you can't bend them like you normally would.
And one of the first responders also talked about trying to get her to write something, and she could not close her arms. Would that be accurate in what you're seeing in these pictures?
Yes, sir.
As we move up out of the diaphragm, and you just mentioned air going into the larynx through the vocal cords, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
In the autopsy, they actually cut her airway so that they could get a good look at the larynx and the vocal cords. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe this picture for the jury and what you're seeing?
This is your larynx that's usually a tube. So it goes down through our throat into our lungs and then starts to branch out left and right. And what you're seeing from your cords down is the soot that is in here that would have been the carbon products that she was breathing in during the fire, which would mean to me it's in an enclosed space.
Would that be consistent with a car, vehicle?
Yes, sir. If you're outdoors, you usually don't see this type of picture.
If you were outdoors, would you normally see the severity of the burns that I've just previously shown you?
Not usually, unless they were incapacitated in some way.
In regards to the larynx and the vocal cords, I believe the pathologist termed this as a heat injury. I believe you differ from her in that. Is that correct?
Normally, you're going to see this more as a chemical burn, the byproducts that are coming from that fire.
And when you explain to the jury the difference between what you would call a heat injury and a chemical injury, chemical burn.
To get heat injury below your larynx, to those of us that deal with burns all the time, that comes with a few things. One would be superheated steam. The other would be where you're having surgery on your larynx and a fire occurs, which can occur when you use one of the electrocardiography devices and you're giving them too much oxygen during that time period, because that's going to propagate any flame that you get, any spark that you get. So then that could come down through the airway and give you an injury that would be associated with the flame and the heat. Normally what you see with these, and this mucosa being so red and irritated through here, is because of the chemicals that you breathe in during the fire itself.
And could these chemicals that you breathe in affect Ms. Chambers' mindset at all?
Oh, you know, sure. I mean, carboxyhemoglobin itself builds up, the carbon monoxide. And if you're in that type of environment for too long, the levels go up and then it affects your own mentation.
You mentioned of course, the burn we're dealing with in this case, more of a chemical burn in the vocal cords and the larynx. Where would you expect to find a heat injury?
Above those vocal cords. So within the mouth and then on your skin and all.
In this case, have you actually viewed evidence of a heat injury?
Yes, sir, I have.
Can you describe the evidence of heat injury that's depicted in this photograph?
What you have through the entire face is heat injury. Your lips are basically, when you look at this picture, it appears that everything is just shrunk back and you really don't have any lips. It's almost up through here, level with that skin, and you've got some splitting through here. And in addition, you see the tongue that has a burn on it.
And what type of burns would you categorize those burns in the face?
Those are 3rd degree, sir.
And you mentioned the lips would be leather.
Yes, sir.
As for the tongue, there was testimony earlier in a question from Dr. Barnhart that the internal examination of the tongue was atraumatic. And she testified that that means the blood was pumping, the blood vessels were flowing.
Yes, sir.
Now, does that make sense in regards to what you see?
Yes, sir. What you see here is that tongue's trying to swell back through here. You got the burn here also that's even deeper. And with that, with blood flow coming in, not getting out well, then this swells. So that's going to make that tongue even worse.
And as you've already talked about with her diaphragm, as you talked about with her larynx, as you talked about with her vocal cords, and you've discussed this picture right here, would all of these affect the speech of Jessica Chambers?
Without a doubt, sir.
And especially that tongue, would that affect the speech of Jessica Chambers?
Yes, sir.
And why do you say that?
Well, you have to have the tongue be able to move and to be able to pronounce anything, basically. You can make sounds, but to be able to make sounds that can be understood, that would be very, very difficult.
In your expert opinion, based on a reasonable degree of medical certainty, do you believe that Jessica Chambers could have been speaking?
Not with what I see here, sir.
Would that tongue have moved?
Very little.
And it was flowing?
Yes, sir.
And those lips were solid?
Yes, sir.
You also mentioned this burn coming in a closed space. Sorry,
Yes,
you have to respond for the court reporter.
Yes, sir.
And we do know the chemical that we're dealing with is gasoline. Are you familiar with the gasoline burn?
Yes, sir.
For Jessica Chambers to have been to sustain these type of injuries from a gasoline burn in a closed space, can you testify as to your expert opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty how long she would have been exposed to this heat?
I would say some 3 to 5 minutes would be a time period that would take to get to that temperature to get that type of burns.
3 to 5 minutes is a long time to sustain a burn. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
When you were burned, what is the first thing you do?
Try to get away from the source of the fire.
For her to stay there 3 to 5 minutes, could that be consistent with her being unconscious?
Could be, yes, sir.
You've seen the pictures from the crime scene. You've seen the photographs from the med. You've also seen the photographs from the autopsy. When would Jessica Chambers had sustained these, when would Jessica Chambers' burns get to this level?
Within 3 to 5 minutes.
Would she have had third-degree burns and the leathering and the solid tongue when she came out of that car?
Yes, sir.
You're going to hear you're not going to hear testimony, but there's been talk about her conditioning being okay to where she could speak and then worsening over time.
Occasionally that will happen. In what I'm seeing in these pictures, I don't think that is the case, sir. And I see an awful lot of burns.
And is that due to the third-degree nature of the burns?
It's the extensive third-degree burns in this case that also includes the tongue.
The testimony from some of the first responders said they thought they heard cold when she said, oh. They thought they heard Eric when she said, eck. What type of sounds do those sound like to you?
I think the guttural sounds that she would make may be interpreted as things, but would be more of a type sound and wouldn't be anywhere near that loud.
More pain sounds?
Pain sounds, yes, sir.
We've all heard stories about how people do things that they could not normally do when they have adrenaline. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And I also want to ask you about desire, because there were several first responders that said Jessica was trying to communicate with them.
Yes, sir.
Do you believe that was the case?
Yes, sir.
Now, given the adrenaline she had and given all the desire in the world that she had to communicate with these first responders, which I have no doubt she did, would she have had the ability to communicate with them?
No, sir, not in my opinion. She's going to be more like a person that's had a stroke. And they have all the desire in the world to communicate and talk to you, to be able to move, to be able to do certain things. But I think that's where Jessica is going to be right now. She may have the desire, but I don't think she is going to have the way to accomplish that goal.
Is that based on her physical problems?
Yes, sir.
We've got our tenor of the witness. Dr. Hickson, you can take the witness stand.
Thank you.
You may cross-examine.
Would you say that medical science is something that would be a 100% certainty in all cases?
No, ma'am.
And I know you just testified momentarily that occasionally there are times when burns may worsen over time. Occasionally?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I believe your opinion is that the young lady, she did not speak. Is that your opinion?
I don't think that she spoke intelligibly to where anyone could be able to understand what she was trying to say.
Okay. So as far as her speaking intelligibly, I'm not sure if you're aware that there were indeed firefighters and other first responders on the scene, at least 10 individuals who spoke with her at different varying times. And they indeed said she said a name. Are you aware of that at all?
I've heard that that's what has been said, But when I look at those pictures, and I understand where you say that science is not 100%, but there are times when you can say, not going to happen. And when I look at those pictures, between the tongue, the cheeks, those lips, and the lips, I mean, everything about that face is just a plastered back face where it's leather. And that's not going to develop like that over an extended period of time.
So I believe you stated that she could walk with
Mhm.
with those type of burns,
Mhm.
correct?
But she didn't walk normally.
She walked though, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. May not have been normally, but she did walk. And I believe your testimony was that she walked likely away from where the fire source was.
I certainly would.
Okay. Certainly, I would too. And in this particular instance, are you aware that she was not walking from the car? She was actually walking towards the car. Were you aware of that?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
But with the confusion with which she could be, if she had originally walked away from the car, she may walk back toward it.
Okay. Could be, and that would have been a lot of walking she would have been doing in the midst of burns she had sustained. Do you agree with that?
To a certain extent, I think I see where you're headed. But in this situation, I'm not sure how far, how long, get away, come back would be, because in her situation at this stage in the game, the energy source that she may have from her adrenaline, even that you've referred to, would be pretty high. So with confusion, or even if there was someone now that was at the scene where she could come back to, would be possible if she's trying to get help.
Yes. And so this possibility again we would look at the fact that there is absolutely no instance of something being 100% medically certain. Correct?
I think you're talking about two different aspects though, ma'am, because with your ambulation, we're referring to large muscles. With our speech, we're talking about much smaller muscles that move our tongue, our lips, to be able to get those things accomplished. So I think in this situation, you're probably comparing apples and oranges.
Okay. Well, let's look at the apples first. Let's do that. If we say that there are 10 persons who heard her say a name as well as Eric set me on fire, also other type of statements that were made that were indicated in reports that were in quotes, because that is what those 10 individuals heard and documented. And for you to say that she did not speak, would you change your opinion if those individuals said that that's what they heard?
No, ma'am, in this case, I wouldn't. I've been doing this an awful long time. I've heard a lot of statements that have been made about how the person was, is, and things of that nature. And if you've never been in this type of situation, the people that are at that scene seeing something like this, with as long as I've been doing this, and if we want to add up the years between residency and practice, we're hitting close to 40. That this is very, what I was trying to say
Yes.
is that For those individuals, there's a shock phase as well. They've not experienced this. And they're going to try their best to adhere to anything that they could with that. And I hear you. I'd like to think that maybe she could have, but in all honesty, ma'am, I can still tell you that with my medical opinion, that would not be the case.
And so the fact that you just testified to that occasionally that will happen, why would your opinion not take into account the individuals who were there on the scene?
Occasionally, what would happen, ma'am?
Her speaking.
I think she would try to speak,
Mhm.
but with what I'm seeing from a physical standpoint on her pictures would be that she has a desire, but the ability to do so to where she could be understood, I don't think is going to happen.
So just in conclusion to the speaking aspect of it, your position is that she could have spoken, but just not intelligibly.
She could have made sounds, but not sounds that we would be able to say would be speech.
Despite the fact what all of the other reports have indicated.
I'm just telling you what I see, ma'am.
Okay. And I believe that there was discussion about, well, let me do this. Are you aware of, in any way, at the point when the first responders got to the scene on that day? Do you know what that time was?
No, ma'am.
Okay. If I say to you that it was about 8:16, and then the arrival at the med center would have been right at about 10 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay. Would that qualify as one of those instances where the condition would worsen through time, because that would appear to be at least an hour and a half later?
Normally, for that to have occurred, she would have had to had fluid resuscitation. They were not able to get fluids in her.
So normally for that to have happened, is what you're saying, is there would have had to have been fluid resuscitation.
Normally for our burns, what happens, and you'll see the progression of a lot of their edema and things, is because they're getting a lot more volume in because they lose fluids. When we have a burn this size, okay, we go by what's called the Parkland formula. At that stage, back at that time, we would have used 4 cc's per kilogram per percent area burn. All right. So she's 90% burn. Multiply that by 4. Okay. And then multiply that by her weight. And that would tell us how much fluids we're going to give her within the first 24 hours. Half of that would be given in the first 8. So basically, she would get, if we were to multiply that out, 360 times, what did she weigh?
I believe about 100 pounds.
So 50 kilos or so,
4.
make it easy, okay? She would be getting over 15 liters worth of fluid, okay? 15 of your big IV bags that you normally see. And in someone that comes out of surgery, what you would do, they may get 1.5 a day. So that's why they swell so. And that's why you have that progression of what you would normally see. In this situation, since she didn't get that type of fluid, she's going to stay up the same aspect of what she had at the time of her injury.
And so again, that would be operating under 100% medical certainty.
No, ma'am, that's under normal case scenario.
Okay.
And that's time after time after time. That one's not going to vary for you.
So my problem is this, Dr. Hickerson, when we're looking at medical science not being something of perfect certainty. And let me direct you to how you spoke about physiologically.
Mhm.
She went through something in her last moments.
Mhm.
She thought, I'm going to die, correct? Okay. Wouldn't you say that there are people diagnosed with cancer even, and they survive, but it could be terminal cancer, and they are completely cured? In this instance,
Terminal cancer, I don't think is cured, ma'am. Those terminologies are mutually exclusive.
okay, a person has cancer, and then the diagnosis is that it is terminal,
Okay.
and then for some reason they're healed after that. Are you saying that's not possible?
Didn't say that.
Okay, I'm asking, did you?
No,
Okay,
that's not what I
clarify that
said
for
with
me.
what you were comparing there. But
Okay,
again, we're going back comparing apples and oranges.
okay,
Okay. There's certain things that are going to happen. There's a certainty. I guess what's the old adage that we have? Nothing's certain but, taxes and death. Okay. Some people try to skirt both of those. But in medicine, I agree with you that there's some things that may or may not happen. There's other things that are going to happen. And with what we're describing here, in my opinion, after having done this for all this length of time, seeing thousands of patients, this one is a certainty.
in dealing with your opinion that it was certain she was going to die, that's certain, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, but as far as her speaking before she died and the physiological part that she was going through,
I'm afraid, ma'am, that I'm going to have to answer in the same way.
okay,
We can go through these scenarios, but from what I am seeing for you, I am trying to give you my best opinion that that's where we are, that it doesn't change. And her facial appearance, her burn, I'm not trying to be dogmatic with you. I'm trying to be honest. Okay. And before I stepped up on this stand, I raised that right hand. That's where I was. And this is what I'm trying to be for you. My mama didn't raise no liar. And in this court of law, it's definitely not going to be.
well, I certainly don't want you to feel like I'm wanting you to lie. I just want to, what I'm asking is that, and I've stated it several times, medical science is not a 100% certainty type field. You've agreed with that, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so, having said that, as I go through the physiological aspects of what you testified to earlier,
Mhm.
I'd like to address it with you. And then you tell me, Ms. Palmer, hey, this is my answer. Can we do that? You said, I'm going to die. That's what she went through, which you feel, in your opinion, she went through as she had experienced her burns, correct? That's one of the first things she thought.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then, will I live?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Not in this case.
Okay.
Okay.
So she wouldn't have thought that.
I don't think she's going to thought, will I live?
Okay.
In her situation, again, this is one of those that I gave you the scenario about as you progress through burns, what people will think. Okay?
Yes,
Now, not everybody thinks I'm going to die.
correct. I agree with
Okay?
that.
In this type of situation, though, with these type of burns, I would not know anyone that would not think they were going to die.
Okay. Fight or flight. I
Mhm.
believe you spoke about that.
Gentleman by the name of Hans Selye was the first one that described that.
Okay. And so the fight part of it, if you allow me to give you an example, and then you tell me if you agree with that or not, okay? Of the fight and flight.
All right?
Would you not think, in your opinion, that she would want to convey who did this to her?
Oh, I think that you probably would.
Okay. Or she would want to convey who did this to her, correct? And so, considering the fact that she had been asked by several individuals to convey that, would that not fall into one of those instances where you said occasionally that will happen and there will be some type of, or let me rephrase it, in this instance, she would want to, this would be an occasion where this may happen, where she is conveying intelligible speech.
What I said was that I felt like she'd probably want to tell. But if you recall after that, I compared that to the person that had the stroke, where they want to convey that. And I don't know if you've ever been around those that had an expressive aphasia,
I have.
that they really want to, but they just can't tell you.
As far as, in this instance, I'm certain of this, but you weren't present on the scene, correct? Okay.
No, ma'am.
All right. And so you did not have an opportunity to personally hear any type of recitations or statements that she made while at the scene, were you?
No, ma'am.
You can't say with absolute certainty that she was in a particular position at the time she sustained those burns, can you?
If you look at those burns, it looks as if she was probably in a sitting position.
Okay. She suffered burns to her back as well as the back of her legs. Would that indicate any other position to you, like a standing position?
No, ma'am. The soles of her feet are spared, which could be a standing, but the buttocks were also spared, where the rest was burned. So, it looks to me as if that was the situation.
So if she were sitting, she sustained burns to the back of her leg?
You can, yes, ma'am, because if you have, depends upon the weight that you've got on your buttocks, where you're setting and in contact with something. Like with my setting here, I've got air cells between my back and the back of the chair, between my thighs even I have some. But that would just be my opinion as to where the position she was in.
So no other possible positions, considering it was the entire front of her body and the entire back of her body, with the exception of the sparing on the buttocks, the bottom of her feet.
If she were standing, I don't see how the buttocks would have been necessarily spared, ma'am.
Well, what is your opinion as to the sparing on the buttocks? What would have caused the sparing to be as it was?
I think that's just the pressure that she had there. From the front, the sparing that you have in the groin could have been from a positioning of the arms at one point or anything else that could have been there.
All right, be direct.
Dr. Hickerson, if I'm correct, you categorize the injuries to the face and the mouth as immediate injuries. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. The pictures that I see there would not be one that's going to progress over time.
And you categorize as a is her sitting in that vehicle for 3 to 5 minutes.
Yes, sir.
And those injuries that she sustained, would she have been just like that when she came out of that car?
I believe so. Yes, sir.
And I believe you and I agree and have no doubt that Jessica Chambers wanted to convey something out there on that scene.
I'm sure she did.
In your expert opinion, as to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, would she have had any ability to do so?
No, sir.
Your Honor, I have no further questions from Dr. Hickerson. I would ask that he be finally excused.
Dr. Hickerson, thank you, and you're fine excused, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.